instead of a flower, we have a lecture that is concerning feminism in, some ways, if not fundamentally. I feel a little bit like the Pope. We planned this as a live event, but then at the last moment decided to go for the hybrid. So I'm addressing you urbi et orbi, both you who are here and those online. So hence the Pope reference. Apart from that, I don't think we would have too many similarities. Our guest is Adity Singh. She's an assistant professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences from Bhopal, India. She did her MA and PhD at the University of Nottingham at the Department of Critical Theory, which was basically the cuckoo's net for Marxism in the Anglo-Saxon academic system. And since she finished her PhD, they changed their name to Critical Theory and then to Culture, Film and Media to conceal their Marxist past. But I would assume there is still some leftist, remnants, circulating there. Her PhD and generally her topic of interest was Alain Badiou's philosophy and the question of freedom. Freedom used to be a rather potent philosophical inquiry until 50 years ago, and then completely withered away from the sides of philosophy, or perhaps not completely. She wrote articles such as Alain Badiou and the Woman Question, Badiou and the Problem of Freedom, Kant and the Quest for Freedom. She teaches a variety of things: ancient Greek philosophy, modern European philosophy, Greek and Roman literature, and political theory. I will not conclude this announcement in a normal tone. If you look at her resume, she knows, I think, a dozen or so languages, among which 3 are native, which I find, counterintuitive to the notion of you should have one native language, and at least 3 of those are dead. So she's good in classical Latin, classical Greek, and classical Sanskrit. And as a child, she rode an elephant. And apart from that, I'll give the floor to her. The title of the talk is The Feminine Rebel, Sophocles Antigone, Bizet's Carmen, and Urban God's The Suffragette. Okay? Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for the most exotic introduction. I'm not sure all of this was true, but yeah, I mean, it's a world of fake media. So, but thank you very much. It was a very nice introduction. Thank you all for being here. So this, am I supposed to be closer to the mic? This is enough? Yeah, good. All right. So thank you for, being ready to listen to this talk, which is a sort of work inside a work in progress. So it's very speculative, not yet completely formed. I was bothering Alex yesterday with half of the ideas and saying, what do you think of this kind of a thing? And the title, I eventually sent Rebellious Women, but earlier the title was Revolting Women, which I thought was more appropriate for the talk that I'm going to give, because I'm looking at 3 male authors, Sophocles, Mérimée, Bizet, and Urban God, and I'm looking at 3 cultural texts, representation of women who rebel by these men, and it's mostly not a very positive representation. So these are all women that, we in the 21st century would like to see them as paradigms, as examples, but at the same time, they are, what kind of paradigms are they? Are they sort of positive paradigms that, exhort women to rebellion, or are they negative paradigms that tell us, you better not rebel because you're going to come to a bad end? I thought I'd take these 3 examples to think generally about rebellion per se, and what is a rebel? What is the figure of the rebel in cultural texts? And I'm looking at a variety of texts. So these are just 3 examples, and I thought this specifically, the question of revolting women or rebellious women would be interesting. But I'm also looking at other sort of cultural texts of revolting rebellious men. And so for this talk, however, I'll analyze to some extent these 3 texts, and I'm hoping that I'll finish the talk sooner so that we can have some discussions, because as I said, it's being from somewhat of a philosophy background, I like to have a dialogue where my half-formed ideas get a bit more formed or more confused, because this talk is going to end in an aporia. It's going to start with an aporia as well. So moving forward, let's see. Okay, which one was this? I'm pressing the right button, right?
No, I'm telling you, like, it works perfectly until you actually start the lecture.
Oh yeah, it moved.
Yeah. Maybe you point it in this direction.
Oh, that direction. Yes. Okay, yeah. So now, first question that I would like to pose is, what is a rebel? Like, how do we think of rebellion? And most of the figures, the traditional figures, are male, and one of the ones that is most sort of rich in literature and its reception is that of Prometheus, who, you know, the classic rebel who stood against Zeus and provided, well, fire to men, you know, writing to men, right? Nevertheless, and then stood firm in the rebellion, was told that, you know, you are going to be punished for this. Well, he says, oh, I have an idea of, you know, what will happen in the future. I can tell you that Zeus is also going to fall. But at the same time, you know, in his anger, in his stubbornness, sort of stays firm in the rebellion. So there's something about the figure of the rebel, and word that often comes up is stasis. And this word stasis, with Antigone, for example, you have this apostasis, you know, standing out, standing away, standing up. And this whole idea of the rebel as some kind of a figure who stands in some ways, you know, outside of the structure. And it's mostly male. You know, these are mostly male figures that work as these rebellious paradigms. They don't come to very good ends either. So it's not just women who are punished. You know, Prometheus is bound to a rock, and as we all know, his liver is eaten every day by this eagle, which regenerates itself. Then you have well, some who rebel without planning to, like Oedipus, and they also don't come to very, very good ends. Women, on the other hand, rebel pretty easily. They can, you know, stand against laws very easily, for the simple reason that, I mean, if you're thinking of rebellion only as breaking some norm, then, you know, just stepping outside the threshold would have been a rebellion in itself. Because they were supposed to remain confined in the private sphere. They were not allowed to go outside. So Antigone's rebellion, first, the example that I'll give is that why did she even leave the house in the first place? I mean, another example from classical tragedy is that of Medea, you know, is a horrifying figure often enough, but even there, she, like, what is the first thing that she's accused of? What is the first thing that she does? She's comes and stands at the threshold, and then she goes into the market and starts chatting to people, and, you know, there are all kinds of problems. So in some ways, you know, there is this idea of stasis, but also politically at that time, what was stasis? What was the fear of stasis? And these tragedies were written in, I mean, the ones that, you know, Sophocles' tragedies, Aeschylus as well, and Euripides, 5th century BC. So height of Athenian democracy. And so we talk about Athenian democracy, but the ones who were in power, the ones who actually got to speak, to have a voice, were often from a very privileged aristocratic background. And so the fear of stasis was also from those of a privileged aristocratic background. There was not as much fear of, a popular rebellion as of when it comes to this idea of stasis. It's about this other, somebody like Alcibiades, who might, join the Spartans and attack, right? So in that sense, in the Ode to Man in Antigone, when man, anthropos, is called hypsipolis apolis, and there's this colon in the middle, which Lacan makes a lot of, where he says pantoporos aporos, hypsipolis apolis. So hypsipolis is highest in the city, and apolis is excluded from the city, outside the city. And there are two ways of reading this colon, as Lacan says, is that one could be that you read it as both highest in the city and outside the city, or sometimes highest in the city, sometimes outside the city. And he says that the latter is a very sort of banal way of reading this. To say pantoporos aporos, capable of everything and completely incapable. So sometimes capable of everything, sometimes completely incapable would be one way of reading it. And one would be at the same time capable of everything and incapable. And this sort of opposition, but at the same time doubling, is what I would see the figure of the rebel as. Is for example, somebody like Prometheus, highest and outside. And so, this idea of an aristocratic rebellion. I'll come back to the question of rebellion after I go through the examples, because I think it would make much more sense. But the other thing that I wanted to say in the very introduction was also, when we look at Prometheus and the idea of literary rebellion, these are paradigms of a certain sort. These are exemplar of human action, of human character, good or bad. That's the thing. And again, it's like hypsipolis apolis pantoporos aporos. It's, kalos kakos, right? It's good and bad together. And it's not simply sometimes good, sometimes bad. That's one way of reading it. The other way of reading it would be to, like, for the audience, it's very, what do you, like, there are different ways of looking at these characters in a tragedy. So the audience that would go there would perhaps identify with the rebel, perhaps with the one rebelled against and see the rebel as something horrible, perhaps both, like the chorus. And, and I think perhaps the chorus is the closest representation of the audience and the audience response. I mean, that's one way of seeing it. But also, in that sense, there's no one fixed, and that's the great thing about literary text, is that there's no one fixed, interpretation of it. And they live on, and which means that we can bring these right now to our 21st century, looking at these figures and see, what can we make of it, and what kind of figures of rebellion, and what do these figures tell us? So, with this general and vague introduction, let me look at, well, women who rebel. So, my three examples. Antigone, because I was already looking at Antigone and working on Antigone, so and the whole idea of women who rebel and the question of the state of rebellion came from Antigone. But I thought I'll bring in two other characters. The choice was, well, I thought I'll take some dramatic texts So we have Carmen and Nellie Pangburn. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this film from 1913 called the Suffragette, with Asta Nielsen playing the suffragette. It's a fairly negative representation of the suffragette movement and of women who become suffragettes. And I'll tell you the plot anyway, at least the way I read it. But these three examples I thought were very interesting because there are certain, I mean, they are absolutely different plots, absolutely different characters, but there are certain similarities in the mode of their rebellion. So all three of them, in some ways, are seen as trying to take a masculine place in these tragedies. And that's what makes them slightly revolting as figures, because, you know, they're not woman enough as the male author would like them to be. So they try to take this masculine place. And for example, with Antigone, in fact, with Antigone, there is one of the central questions along which the play could be read is the division between the masculine and the feminine, where Creon says that I'm not a man, but she is a man if she can get away with, you know, breaking the laws and not being punished for it. At another point, he says, I think I have written these down. Let me see if I can. So yeah, she would be the man, not I, if she defeated me and did not pay for it, right? This idea of Nike, Nikao, I think, if she defeated me and did not pay for it. Then he says, when it comes to Ismene, who is a good woman, right? Who actually does follow the law, but he says, oh, she should also be killed. And why? Because he says, while I'm living, no woman shall rule. And it's not that, you know, Ismene is trying to rule, but, you know, he's just gotten really irritated with women generally. And it's really interesting because if it were a man who had done this, let's say instead of Antigone, if it was Haemon who said, you know, I'll go and he would have been angry. He might have actually gone through the same mode of punishment. But in the play, the fact that, you know, and it's a question of what kind of audience response is being called, because the audience was also primarily male for various reasons, probably because mostly it was men who stepped out, and then also men who could, you know, push others out and find a place in the huge theater. But anyway, so we are looking at a male audience. We are looking at, in Antigone, we are looking at a male chorus, a chorus entirely of elders. And this is different, for example, from Medea, where the chorus is that of other women who are pretty supportive of Medea till about the end, where she says, oh, I'm going to kill the children. They're like, are you sure you should do this? You know, like, this is going a bit too far. But it's mainly a very unsympathetic chorus towards Antigone. And Antigone is very aware of that. She is very irritated with the chorus as well. And at some point, and the chorus has always, you know, ambivalent, says one thing to Creon, another thing to Antigone, but they're very unsupportive. So she's very isolated. And I mean, this is a character that many people have talked about of Sophoclean heroes, that they are very isolated. But she's very isolated also in terms of gender, and stands as a rebel all alone. Prometheus has a chorus also of the opposite gender. So in Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, his chorus is all these, you know, nymphs, I think, or birds, these female birds who come and support him. But the question of him being a man is not so central. Here in Antigone, her being a woman is definitely a problem. And which is why, you know, I thought we need to think not simply of rebellion, but feminine rebellion, you know, like, it is a rebellion, but there is something that being a woman that adds to the sharpness of the rebellion. And so Creon says things like, so when he says, you know, Ismene as well, he says, while I'm living, no woman should rule. And then he says, henceforth, let them stay at home like women, not roam abroad. right? So very important that perhaps as girls, they were roaming about. He feels that he didn't, rule his household well enough. And he says, okay, I don't know if I have that quote here, but at some point he says that, if a man who cannot rule a household cannot rule a city. And the chorus in the very beginning is extremely sympathetic to Creon, because Creon appears as this sensible ruler, the one who says things like, nor would I count that man, my friend, who was my country's foe. And in the play, at no point in the beginning do we see the chorus saying that, there was something wrong with Creon's edict that Polynices should not be buried, and the enemy should not be buried. And this whole question of burial, which I'll not bring in out here, they are very supportive of him. And he says, never shall I allow the villain to win more honor than the upright, but any who show love to this our city in life and death alike shall win my praise. Right. So this kind of a person who talks about universal rights, about the city, about the good of people, and feels that he is in the right also when it comes to the rules of the gods. The gods also are in his support, which by the end of the play, he discovers they're not quite. Though, interestingly, I mean, by the end of the play, we are not sure even Antigone discovers herself to be in the right, at least by the narrative of the play. Because, yes, Creon discovers himself to be in the wrong. For what reason? Not for, being a tyrant, but for not burying people properly. So he's in the wrong for not burying his kinsfolk. His Polynices would be his nephew, and Antigone would be his niece. So there is this question of, not like the classic idea of what is justice in the beginning of Plato's Republic, when I forgot the first character he's asked, what is justice? Like, oh, to be good to our friends and to be hateful to our enemies. And so he breaks that law, right? To be good to our friends. So, okay, he's punished for that. Antigone, we don't know. It's open. She dies. She doesn't ascend to the gods. We don't know what happens to her in Hades. She says that, oh, in Hades things would be better for me, but we don't know. So the play is ambivalent on Antigone's fate, and throughout, she's called obstinate, insolent, prideful. There's one point where she's even called a slave. We don't know to what, like dule, like to what. There is this idea that, disobedience as a woman is the worst thing that she could do. And it's not opposed. In fact, Ismene, her sister. So I'll come back to this one slide, perhaps. You said back is not possible, right?
Don't go back, we have enough time. It's 11:03.
Okay, first I'll talk about Antigone then, because I was going to sort of go to Ismene and come back to Antigone, but okay. She's called all that, but at the same time, the chorus also calls her things like autonomous. That's a word applied to Antigone, autonomous, and monnaie, alone. In context, it's not applied positively, however, right? That she's autonomous is not a good thing. Like that she's autonomous is, her hubris, really, that she's too autonomous. She thinks herself almost like the gods. And at some point they say, oh, you will, and it's a very ironic kind of a statement by the chorus saying that, oh, you will have a fate equal to the gods by dying in this really bizarre way, by being buried alive. So you'll have a fate equal to the gods. And she gets very angry. She says that, are you laughing at me? Are you mocking me? And in Greek tragedy, actually, laughter and mocking is like, worse than anything else. In fact, Medea gets extremely angry because she feels she's going to be laughed at, not for any other reason. Prometheus gets angry at the idea of being laughed at. So this whole, and Antigone is especially angry at this idea of being laughed at. So laughter is a pretty horrible thing in Greek tragedy. So while she's called autonomous and while she's called godlike, it's in a way where I mean, it's not just we as audience who see it as ironic, the modern audience, but Antigone herself sees it as ironic. She says, do not make fun of me. I have no guarantee from the gods, and in fact refuses. She says, I have no guarantee from the gods that what I'm doing is right, but I will do it because this is what I think is right. And so in that sense, she stands and in this border of the place that a rebellious man would be expected to take, right? And she takes it as a woman. And as I said, as a woman, it's easier to break the rule because just making herself visible, just making herself a part of the public rather than, something private, as she should have been inside, she already stands out as somebody who is committing apostasis, right? She's sort of standing against the rules. And at the same time, while doing that, she becomes entirely isolated. She becomes this entirely Monet, like she doesn't have any kind of support from either her family, the chorus, the city, the gods. They try and convince her. So Ismene, like the dialogue with Ismene, she tries to convince Antigone to not do this, to not rebel. And at the end of it, she says, oh, well, okay, if you're going to be killed, I will join you. And Antigone says, no, I am all alone in this. If you could not join me earlier, now, get lost. Doesn't matter, Antigone, Ismene is also punished along with Antigone, but Antigone now takes up the space of being alone. She wants to be alone. In fact, she revels in being alone. And again, just to draw a similarity to Prometheus, in Prometheus Bound, when Okeanos comes and says, I'll go and plead on your behalf with Zeus, he'll listen to me. And Prometheus says, look, it's not going to help, so do not do it. And Okeanos insists, and Prometheus insists, saying, do not, I want to stay chained to the rock almost. He doesn't say that, but he says it's horrible to be chained to the rock, but, I'm not going to plead with Zeus. In fact, when Mercury comes, Hermes comes and sort of says, tell me, what is the prophecy? I want to know, of course, of Zeus's fall. He says, no, I won't tell you. And he says, I would rather my freedom than your servitude. And this line was taken up, interestingly, by Marx, because we mentioned Marx in the very beginning, in his PhD thesis, where he puts it as an epigraph saying, the cry of Prometheus. And so Prometheus became a figure in that sense. And in fact, Prometheus later became a figure of common will anyway. Okay, moving on from that. So the question is, how much can we as audience identify with the rebels? How much would an audience of that time identify with Antigone? I don't know. They would perhaps, like the chorus, feel somewhat sorry for her. But at the same time, is she this impetuous, petulant child who doesn't understand how the laws work, is standing against it, is going to, be destroyed because of it, and does get destroyed because of it? It has a satisfying conclusion in that sense, right? Because she is punished. She doesn't get away with punishment, which is what Creon says in the very beginning, that, I would not be a man, but she would be a man if she got away with punishment. She doesn't get away with punishment. So in that sense, the women who rebel have a satisfying conclusion. As you said, not move to the next slide. So Carmen, let me just very quickly bring in Carmen. Now, Carmen, her status as a rebel is odd. Are you familiar with the opera or with the novel? Mermaids. With Carmen, she is a gypsy woman, you know, a witch. She has all the revolting characteristics of a woman who is too independent. She is a criminal even, you know, joins a brigand group. She's a factory girl. They work in a cigarette factory, at least in the opera. And in the very beginning, you know, all the women are represented as constantly smoking and going out and being, you know, seductive while smoking in this very, very odd way. You know, it doesn't work in Serbia, right?
Very possible, you know, with anti-smoking, you know, culture, it's very possible. You know, it's attractive and seductive.
But yeah, so she's a factory girl. So already she's in that sense working, and not just her, but all of the women are in that sense somewhat outside of what a good woman should be. And her foil is Michaela, this other girl who comes in with from Don Jose's mother, from his side. And let me see if I have this lovely quote from there. I have about 20 minutes. Yeah. Well, okay. So to go very, very, very quickly with Carmen. So she is Don Jose in the very beginning, you know, when she throws a flower at him and, you know, all these things, he calls her, you know, demon, right? She's this demo who is like seducing him away from the good, from his mother, from duty, from law, from, you know, all the things that he should do. And Carmen, when she's arrested, she says, you know, cut me, burn me, I shall tell you nothing. I'll defy everything, fire, sword, heaven itself, right? This again, this extreme position, and which is why I thought she was a very, very interesting example, but for what? I mean, in what is she rebellious at all? And her rebellion is not against the state. It's not against the rule, against a particular kind of status quo of, I guess, subjection via fidelity to a man, if that's one way of putting it. Where the problem with Carmen and why she's such a revolting and horrible figure is that, as the Toreador says to Don Jose at the end, that, you were the ex-lover, right? Don't worry, her love affairs last only 6 months, right? And that's what makes her really revolting. And again, you know, the bad end that she comes to, which is she's killed, you know, she's murdered. At the end of it, when she's called, Don Jose says to her, so she, yeah. So the last line she says when she's being killed. So she knows that she's going to be killed, by the way, in the opera, because she sees these cards, right? And the cards tell her death, right? So she says, oh, doesn't matter, you know, whichever cards I look at, they tell me death. I am going to die. So that death actually in some ways very interestingly frees her to the extent that she says, okay, I have this limited time, I'll do whatever I want. And then she says, Carmen will never yield. Free she was born and free she will die, right? And before death, before she's killed, she knows she's going to die. She says, okay, stab me if you want, but I'm not going to go with you. She shouts, liberté, 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 right? It's again, this very strange figure. Like I brought her in as a foil because, I mean, she's not doing any kind of political rebellion, but she stands as a rebellious figure, who again, persists in the stance. And that's something that I'm trying to bring forth. And you said 20 minutes. I'll have to give Nelly Panburn's introduction in that time. Yeah.
Sounds like a you problem to me.
Sounds like a you problem to me. Okay. Let me see. I'll move on and I'll get to Nelly Panburn as, the nice end. Thinking, yeah, okay. Okay, so women who don't rebel. Now, all of these, and I've not gotten to Nelly Panburn, but as I said, I'll come back to her afterwards. When you have the rebellious woman, there seems to be another woman who is the foil to this, horrible, revolting, rebellious woman who is the good one, right? So you have Ismene, Antigone's sister. You have Micaela, Don Jose's fiancée, till he, drops her. And Nelly, as I said, is an interesting character because she herself is her foil, which we'll see. And what are the good characteristics of the foil? They're timid, they're normal, they keep to their place as women. As Creon says, to be women, not roaming about free. Ismene breaks it by going with Antigone and then trying to bring her back. But other than that, she says, it's not in me to go against the rules of the city. In fact, Ismene has these great dialogues where she says, okay, I have not written those dialogues. I've just put the line numbers, so that doesn't help me. But yeah, from memory, things like, I do not have it in me to, go against the laws. I do not have it in me to oppose things, like let's sort of, stay within the rules, because this is our place as women. And Antigone gets really, really pissed off with this. She says, I'm not going to help. I'm not going to take your help anymore at all, even if you decide to offer it, because you will not share in my glory, she says. And then she says, whose was the deed? The God, the God of death knows well. So when I die, we know that it's not you. Like you might enjoy your particular small life right now, but I'll be the one who is glorious. And sort of accuses her, saying that it was Creon you cared about, so while Creon himself identifies himself with the city at some point, says, oh, I, the city, we, the city is me kind of a attitude. Antigone accuses Ismene of supporting not the laws, but Creon. So Antigone also, in that sense, makes it one-to-one opposition and says, you chose life while I chose death. And this very important, choice of death, which also makes her somewhat abnormal, right? And she then falls very neatly into the category of woman, hidden, private, except that small point where she tries to support her sister. So solidarity is a big problem, right? So, if you show solidarity to the rebel, you are also somewhat of a rebel, I guess. Now, how much does the audience, well, I don't suppose the audience would necessarily identify, but they would in fact see Ismene probably as the better, the better character. In fact, interestingly enough, in Carmen, there's this one song by Micaela. Carmen has all these wonderful songs, right? But there's this one song by Micaela, which famously always gets more applause than all of the other songs, usually. And it is supposed to be, and I remember, so this is a discussion that we had in one of the classes where I was a student, where the teacher asked, it's like, so why do you think, Micaela gets, more applause than, all of the others? And I was just like, well, because the audience likes this kind of woman who goes with the rule and everything. And he got really irritated with me. He's like, no, it's because her song is better. So my somewhat feminist interpretation was completely unacceptable, but I still persist in that, because I think that Micaela gets more, she is in some ways the nicer figure in the opera, because she's she's just generally nice, you know, like, but she's also really weak throughout. You know, she doesn't even persist in, so she comes back to save Don Jose, and it's a very, very weird saving where she goes and tells him that, oh, Don Jose, your mother is dying, come back home, etc., etc. And then Don Jose, you know, eventually goes with her at that moment, but she doesn't even persist in that very much. She's very, very timid, and the timidity is attractive, apparently. So, to some extent, to the audience, to Don Jose, however, to his loss, you know, it's Carmen who becomes more attractive. But then Carmen is a demon and a witch and all these things, so we don't know. You know, like whether Carmen is herself attractive or is it her arts and allurements which are attractive. But anyway, so again, you know, the audience response to the non-rebellious woman, you know, the nicer woman. It's okay. Now I'll drink water while this change. I think I've talked enough about Antigone and Ismene, so and you
persist, you feel that.
Yeah, I like this. In fact, you know, choose that is precisely what, you know, Antigone says to Ismene. So she says that, you know, like, it was your choice, right, to not rebel. You know, now you cannot change it. So it is a question of, you know, choice. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you decide to not do something, that is also very much a choice, and that's something that Antigone persists in. And that's why she says that, you know, Ismene is not going to get the glory that Antigone should get. So because she chose, and that choice is now made once and for all. She can't back off. In fact, backing off is in tragedy again, you know, the figure of the hero with Authadia, you know, there's this very rebellious, like, or rather very stubborn, you know, and I guess the difference between Creon and Antigone, they're both heroes in some ways, but who is the real hero? It's like a debate in classical studies, right? Who's the real hero of this play? Well, I mean, to take a stance, I would say it is Antigone, you know, because not only does she stand alone and take a stance and remain stubborn, she also never backs off, while Creon does. So Creon starts with, you know, this whole, you know, stubbornness of my law, my rules. Well, first, the city's law, the city's rules, and then that degenerates into my law, my rules. And at the end of it, he's just like, oh no, I have, you know, I discovered, you know, my mistake. And in fact, do I have this written? I hope I do. He says, too late, you see, no, the chorus says, too late, you see the path of wisdom. And he says, to yield is very hard, but to resist and meet disaster, that is harder still. You cannot imagine Antigone saying this, right? Antigone is like, I will not yield, which is what Carmen also said afterwards. I will not yield, you know, while Creon is like, to yield is hard, but to resist is harder, right? So in that sense, you know, like, I mean, I just, on the basis of this, I would say that Antigone is the real hero, also because she's the rebel. And it's a play with a central character of a rebellious woman. Yeah. I like this very sort of, you know, glaring looks you're giving me. Move on. So
a successful woman, there is always, you know, a pushy man.
A pushy man, yeah.
I want you to deliver your, you know, ultimate
point, yeah. Otherwise, it'd be really depressing because, you know, before the ultimate message, it's all about, you know, like, you rebel and you have a bad end. Well, Carmen and Michaela, we have talked about enough. And okay, to come to the final example, which I think is the most interesting example of the lot. This film, called The Suffragette, is a film from 1913, set in England, with German untertitles. No, not untertitles, middle titles, what are they called? Not even subtitles, whatever. Silent film. The mid titles, that thing. And Asta Nielsen, Norwegian actress, amazing actress, by the way. And the director, anyway, so she is called Nellie Pangburn, no relation to any actual existent person, apparently, but we know Sylvia Pankhurst, I think you've all heard of, and the Pankhurst family were very central to the suffragette movement. So she's Nellie Pangburn, who is a good aristocratic woman in the very beginning, divided between her parents. Father, who wants her to marry, good aristocratic man and live a happy life, and the mother, who wants her to join the suffragette movement and fight for the rights of women. She is an interesting character because she starts out by just being like a girl who has like 3 suitors, and then she sees a stranger, has a crush on him, and then rejects the suitors, not because she wants to become a suffragette, but because she has a crush on a 4th person, right? It's not and then she ends up going to her mother. Her mother, on the other hand, is this, this kind of a not very nice character who bullies and pushes and pressures her daughter into becoming part of the suffragette movement through different things. First, she tries to convince her with words. Nellie is not convinced. Then she takes her to see some poor families. And in the context of the film, it's shown in this really horrible way where, Nellie goes to these poor families and she gets convinced because they are so thankful to her that she feels like a great woman, So she's like, oh, maybe I should fight for the rights of, the underprivileged kind of a thing. But as she becomes part of the movement, she gets more and more politicized. And she gets more and more politicized in such a way that she gives these big speeches, puts herself bodily at risk, ends up getting arrested, tortured by the police, stands firm in face of that torture. She is force-fed, this film is amazing and it shows all these different episodes and all of these things. And as she gets more politicized, she also gets more and more part of the militant suffragette movement. As shown in the film, which is shown as a horrifying thing. Again, as I said, the film is not pro-suffragette. They discover, and the person that she has a crush on, this stranger, is Lord Askew. Again, no connection to any real people apparently, but of course there is, who is very anti-suffragette, who is an anti-suffragette politician. And he is about to pass a law which bans any kind of suffragette movements, so they want to get him into trouble. So what the suffragettes plan is to blackmail him by getting in touch with one of his ex-mistresses and getting some kind of a compromising letter, and to blackmail him saying that we'll make this public and then you will get into trouble with your elections in that sense. So they plan that, and Nellie is sent off to blackmail him. Or she decides, rather, she's not sent off, she decides herself. And she has gotten politicized to this extent that she wants to go and blackmail him. In the meantime, this mother gives her a bomb, saying that put this under the chair of this Lord Askew. And, if blackmail works, otherwise kill him. Nellie is a bit... A bomb, yeah, a bomb. So yeah, so Nellie is a bit, terrified by the idea, but she agrees, and that shows to the extent to which she's politicized or peer pressured, depending on which way you see the film, that she agrees to take the bomb and put it under the chair. But once she gets there, she realizes this is the man that she had a crush on. She didn't know that Lord Askew was that same man that she liked from the very beginning, and gets into this terrible dilemma I mean, she would have been happy to kill a random man, perhaps, but, you know, not the man that she likes. First she tries to blackmail him. And Lord Askew says something like, you know, I'm anyway opposed to the suffragettes, but like, if these are your methods, I would, you know, even if I were not opposed, I would be opposed, kind of a thing. And kicks her out. She goes home and then she cries and cries because she has put the bomb and she was not able to take the bomb away in time. And then the whole last part of the drama, which is very, very sort of, you know, stressful, and, you know, it's like 5 minutes before the bomb goes off, 2 minutes before the bomb goes off, you know, she tries to go and rescue Lord Askew. I'll not go into the details of, you know, the whole rescue plan, but it works. I mean, rather, she doesn't manage to rescue, she managed to turn up there, and the meeting that, you know, he was going to have is over, and, you know, he's saved. And at midnight, the bomb goes off, right? He doesn't die, but the office is destroyed. And from inside the bomb comes a banner that says "Votes for Women," right? While she is at the site of the thing. So obviously everybody catches hold of her. And she is very thankfully saved by the man who says, oh, she's not a suffragette, she's my fiancée, right? So Lord Askew rescues her and takes her sort of, you know, gives her some, you know, takes her to go sit in the study and is very nice and chivalrous as good men are supposed to be. And, you know, gives, and then as, you know, she calms down, he takes out this banner and says, look, I know that, you know, you are the suffragette because we found this Votes for Women in there. So the last scene of the film, she takes that banner, tears it up, right, on screen, saying, no votes for women, you know, and, you know, embraces Lord Askew. And the next scene, she's there in a tableau with her, Lord Askew, and 5 children. And oh, I'm supposed to point forwards, right? Yeah. I learned halfway through. Oh. Yes, that's a pacifier.
It's a very good English word for it.
Well, what is it called in Serbian? Not a pacifier.
It has
nothing to do with pacifying. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the pacifier, right? So that's the end of the suffragette. So in that sense, it's her against herself. She is her own foil. Yeah. And we have the mid titles. I still can't remember the word for it, which says, the hand that moves the cradle moves the world. And I don't know, I'm not very sure, still not very sure what it is trying to tell us, you know, to be fair. But yeah, the hand that moves the cradle moves the world. So, you know, that's the fate of Nellie Pamburn. So, fate of rebellious women. Martyred is what I would call Antigone, murdered Carmen, married, you know, like pretty equivalent in this case. And this is how the status quo would absorb the rebellion again, right? And eventually, no real change will be seen in you know, how the world and how the world works, what change should have been brought. We don't see anything. So my questions, first to the writers. Oh, I keep forgetting. Are you going to move? Oh yeah, okay. In 5-6 minutes, okay. I mean, these are all things which are known to everyone. You know, my analysis is over. Now I'm just trying to say hopeful things. Perhaps or not.
Like five times per post, more than that.
Yeah. So now, you know, some very obvious points to make about, you know, why do we have so many negative representations of rebellious women? You know, like why, and why do the rebellious women always come to this very, you know, the good denouement of being murdered or married? You know, so they have to die. In fact, you know, operatic women have a very, very bad time. In like if you look at Carmen is just one example, but generally women in opera don't really, you know, end up in sort of like they're usually killed. I mean, one of the exceptions, I guess, is Beethoven's Fidelio, if you're familiar with that one, where the woman interestingly takes the place of a man and tries to rescue her husband, and ends up rescuing the whole set of prisoners, right? so you know, that's I guess, you know, Beethoven exception. But apart from that, I mean, they're also not very trustworthy. Like they're you know, La Donna Immobile, right? She's like, Carmen is the best example of this. You know, every 6 months she'll change. And while, you know, in Verdi's Rigoletto, like it's one view of this. The woman is, you know, by nature somehow, the, you know, frailty, thy name is woman sort of a thing. But in Carmen, and that's why I think it's a good example, she says, no, I am, and I will persist in this, right? It's not that I am mobile, I'm not mobile, right? I'm like, I am, this is my stance, and I stand in this way. So anyway, what worries the patriarchy? It's I guess, you know, like obvious point to make is that it's a form of power structures. So the more steep the pyramid, the better for the ones on top. Like I'm using an analysis similar to one that La Boétie uses in Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, where he says that why would, you know, many, when there are many, you know, listen to a tyrant, you know, like, because when you have a greater number, you can actually get together and overthrow the tyrant. So why would you listen to a tyrant? And he says that, well, we are all entrenched in our places in a pyramid of power. So for me to maintain this position, I need to keep my position in certain ways. So I guess that's one of the things. Anyway, we can come back to this in the question. And so in that sense, you know, to enfranchise another fragment of the majority, you know, you are stripping away the privileges of the few and stripping away at your own few privileges as well. So it's very satisfying. It's actually very prudent to keep the status quo, unless you are at the bottom of it, then it's not very prudent. But, you know, we're looking at rebels, right? Aristocratic rebels, and we're looking at these things. And we are looking at this idea of somebody who is weird enough that they have the privilege and yet rebel. You know, unlike, you know, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Antigone has a lot to lose, right? Prometheus has a lot to lose. So, and which is why, you know, this figure of the rebel is a weird one. So it's a slippery slope, right? You know, and you will end up at the bottom of the pyramid if you rebel. In that sense, we can say that negative representations of the marginalized is just another arsenal, as I've said, in the fight to maintain the status quo. Changes, yeah. So then, you know, the question that Alex said he liked for I'm not very trustworthy reasons, you know, it was, why would some women oppose their emancipation? You know, what is this? And we see it often enough. I mean, at least I'm used to this in India, where if you wear a short skirt on the metro, you know, you might be stopped by normally women who would say, you know, don't people in your family tell you you should not be roaming about in short skirts or something? You know, it's not men usually who would, you know, say this. It's women. It's oddly enough, but. Social care, yeah. And there's social care, that's what they're providing. But apart from that, apart from, somebody coming forward and telling other women to behave, why do women tell themselves to behave, right? I guess one of the reasons would be, again, the same idea of voluntary servitude, right? You have a certain place in the hierarchy. You do have something to lose, right? You could be worse off. Practically, we do see, that we could be worse off by taking certain stances. You could end up in jail being tortured. So that's one thing. And then, your place in the hierarchy, better the devil one knows. And also, solidarity is lacking. Solidarity is something that has to be built. It doesn't come automatically. In fact, you don't automatically feel solidarity for another person for being of the same gender as you. And that's something that we have unfortunately seen. Of course, in the literary examples, it looks worse because a lot of them have been written by men, where the men do not see women having solidarity, while and it's almost like this is this hidden sphere, like this the women's room somewhere in the back. God knows what they talk about, and in that, I guess Euripides is exceptional, where Medea has all the support of the women. All the women are in her support. Though Medea has no solidarity with the poor princess that Jason got married to, right? So she's just like, oh, I'll give her a poisoned cloak and kill her. So, not exactly. Or in Agamemnon, where everybody feels like very sorry for Iphigenia and, the fact that she's murdered. But Cassandra, what was the point of killing her? At all. Oh, she just came with Agamemnon, right? So, so she, Clytemnestra sees her as being an appendage of Agamemnon rather than a woman in herself. So solidarity itself is not automatic, first of all. And then there is also a great degree of fatalism, right? And that's not just for women's emancipation, for any kind of political movement. It's you go on protest, nothing happens, some people get arrested, things remain the same. You fight for rights, things remain the same. So there's no sign that things are getting better. So, they don't want to risk losing whatever that one has. So a few of the things I thought about, in our discussion, maybe we could think of a few things. And have I run out of my 5 minutes? Yeah. I have a minute, I'll take 5. I rebel. So the question of, okay, what is the point of rebellion? Right, we've seen all these examples, like all it leads to is death or, babies. I don't know. So what is the point of quite similar, perhaps, yeah, I don't know. I will not get into that really fraught and dangerous discussion, but yeah. So the question is, to what extent could these heroes be seen as really autonomous, right? And really acting in ways, these are questions that I'm asking, rather, I'm not going to give answers, in ways that are transformative of the order from which they've emerged. Are they really trying to transform the order, any of these, or are they just acting in their own stubborn narrow-mindedness? With Antigone, does she want to change anything of the order? In fact, no, she wants to go back to, she's like, no, there are older laws. You have come up with these laws, these are new, but there are older laws of the gods, of how to treat your philoi, how to treat your friends, how to treat your family members, which supersede your laws. So she's not really saying, I want to transform the order and come up with something new. It's not like at the end of Orestes in Agamemnon, where he says, okay, let's establish a law court, to resolve our problem. She wants to go back to an old order. With Prometheus, perhaps slightly different, but at the same time, he gives his motivation. If you're looking at motivations, he gives his motivation as, I helped out Zeus and look, he punished me. So I want revenge. And it's often revenge rather than, the desire for, and why does he help the mortals anyway? He helps the mortals saying that I keep seeing the death. I want them to live longer. It's again very sort of, he doesn't want to change the order. He just want, like, the changing the order is incidental to some extent. So first that, and then even if it is a rebellion in the sense of, like rebellion, of course, personal thing, even if it's trying to change an order, it fails in all of these cases, in all of these examples. And my question is, does she even want to? So there is that. And see, I'm taking a minute per slide. So if it moves. Okay, I'm not going to go through this slide because I've written lots out there.
15 minutes, next lecture start.
Okay, yeah. The question of depictions, let's move on. We can talk about it later. So the way rebellion is often seen is this rebellion. This is a quote from André Breton, who says, rebellion is its own justification, completely independent of the chance it has to modify the state of affairs that gives rise to it. It's a spark in the wind, but a spark in search of a powder keg. And that makes this rebellious figure interesting for me. That in trying to transform something personally, they may perhaps transform something bigger than they had planned to. And so my questions then are, that when we think of political change, right? When we think of political change, we don't think of it simply in terms of rebellion, but in terms of this conviction that we can alter our social circumstances. There is some change that we can make, and it's a powerful idea, a contentious idea that leads us to taking a political stance. In this, is rebellion enough? Well, I guess my talk basically said no, but the question is, what are its stakes? Is it necessary on the other hand, right? Enough, maybe not. It's not sufficient, but is it necessary? What are its stakes? What are its limits? How far does it go? And what else is required for what is its emancipatory potential? So when we say rebellion fails, right? It is a failure. We rebelled, but nothing came out of it. So the question that we could still ask is, what is failure? What is victory? In fact, we are fighting on multiple fronts when we are fighting for emancipation. And that's why the slide I skipped on negative representations. There are all these films from the 1910s and 20s on the suffragette movement, which show women as being horrible. But on the other hand, the cinema audience that went to watch these women were also comprised of women who saw not necessarily, that, the rebellion failed and it's horrible to be a suffragette, but the fact that, oh, there are women who are standing up for their rights, so the figure of the rebel itself is a paradigm and a bad example for some, but a good example for many. And I think just taking a few of those good examples and bringing it forward as cultural texts, Medea is a horrible character, but at the same time, now we look at her and we think very, interesting paradigm of what a woman could be. So in that sense, failure, victory is very difficult to sort of define. And so eventually, I guess, Alex said I should have like a nice ending on Women's Day and say some nice things. Instead of a really pessimistic statement. So I would go with, the idea of solidarity, hope, courage when it comes to, this question, and the idea of persistence and change and the idea of building solidarity. And these are the things required for emancipation. And the readiness to risk, which comes with rebellion, right? So I'll stop there. I will not go into all of these, extra things that I want to talk about. Oh, this never moved. Sorry, I'm looking at the slide on my computer, but this is what I was talking about. So yeah,
I appear this. Thank you. I appear as this authoritarian figure but it's purely driven with the idea that audience has some rights. And if we deprive audience of time, then we deprive them of their rights.
Yeah, no, I feel really bad as well. I wanted more discussion, actually.
So shoot in like a rafale, like, you know, if you have questions, comments, just, you know. Mike?
I have to say that I really, really enjoyed, and that is why I called for the rebellion. And then somehow also our rights can be now decided, especially for this date. So, you know, it is a topic for this date. But if I do have some time, I wanted to, I mean, first I was also working on Antigone, so it was a wonderful talk, but I am also struggling a lot with the notion of the sovereign continuously in my life. I mean, I'm also doing philosophy and feminist theory or feminist practice. So at some point, you were talking about Antigone, and then you said that Antigone wanted to take masculine space. And I thought whether we should think about the sovereign space and generally about the idea of sovereignty. Why it came to me from this pantoporos aporos, because that's the master's position in Hegel's scene of master and slave, and also from the apolis hypsopolis, which is in fact the figure of the sovereign who's beyond law and at the same time it's center, so it's Creon. And Antigone wants to take that place somehow. She wants to move in there. She's also aristocratic, so it's not from some other part of this hierarchical system. And then also when you were mentioning suffragettes, they do the same thing, but they want to take the position of the citizen. That's not now kings but it is a fight for sovereignty, even with now that when we were talking about, again, very wonderfully about Carmen, even Carmen with that, when she protested, she's not mobile, that she is the one who chooses fidelity rather than subjection, but she chooses when, to what extent, how. So she fights for, we'll call it independence, autonomy, but also sovereignty over your own body. And so I don't know, I mean, I was thinking now with this, you know, it was from the old days to today, but this, the question is why whenever women rebel, that's a hubris of a kind, because it is always some kind of hubris against who the sovereign is and why he mainly defines the law the way he does.
Yeah, no,
Wait.
Excellent point. Yeah. You want to listen to all the questions first? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
No.
Please.
We can listen to questions, but I don't think we have time for answers.
I like the silencing.
If it's either or,
no,
you silence yourself. If it's either or, I'd rather have questions than answers.
No,
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have spoken enough. So, but yeah, excellent point. So thank you, and we'll discuss this afterwards, perhaps. Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah.
Huh?
Questions?
If not, you can reply directly.
Not? Yeah, okay. Cool. So no, excellent point. So this whole idea of sovereignty is so central to the whole thing and to all of them. In fact, I had not thought of Carmen's sovereignty. So in that case, I was actually thinking both of Antigone. You know, so no man should, you know, no woman should rule while, you know, I'm there, kind of a thing. So Creon makes it into a question of, you know, sovereignty, of ruling, of, in fact, you know, when he tells his son that, you know, you are a woman's plaything, right? So there's again this thing of like, not just no woman should rule, but not even a man who has a woman, you know, as the reason for their action, like the woman directing their action should rule. So that, and you know, the pantoporos aporos, and the hypsopolis apolis. So I mean, earlier I took one aspect of it and talked about, you know, the idea of stasis and the person who stands. But you're right, the sovereign himself is hypsopolis apolis to a large extent, because they are highest in the city. But at the same time, you know, their own, like the hubris is that their own laws do not apply to them necessarily. And in that sense, Antigone is hubristic by trying to define what law is. And which is why till the end, we don't get any confirmation that what she has done is right. We get a confirmation that what Creon has done is wrong, but it's not even characterized as hubris, it's characterized as a mistake. And in fact, I would say that Creon's character is not hubristic, but full of hamartia. And Antigone is an interesting play in that hamartia is worse than hubris in this one, right? Because you have a hubristic character, which is Antigone, for basically trying to take up the place of the sovereign, as you point out. And then you have the character who misses the mark constantly. So you have Creon, who keeps missing the mark. And in fact, you know, the word Creon itself means ruler. But what does Antigone mean? Like, you know, the names had some significance often enough. But Creon means ruler, a ruler who starts by being like a acceptable ruler. In fact, you know, his character, we see it develop through, well, later on in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus Tyrannus, he's a very sensible character, sensitive character. And then you have him being so idiotic. And he keeps assuming that any opposition to him is because of money. He keeps mentioning kerdos and argurion, saying like, you know, it's for gain, it's for money. And everybody is afraid of him. In fact, one of my favorite characters in the play is the watchman, the guard who comes in, who says that, well, you know, I don't want to like confront the king, I'll get into trouble. You know, he's the one who stays as far away from, you know, all trouble as possible. And he says, I could have some support. I feel sorry for Antigone, but you know, I'm going to throw her under the bus because it's so you have all these characters who do not take the hubristic position. So, you know, that's a very interesting point. Now, with the suffragettes, with votes, which was exactly what I was talking about, that, you know, why was it so horrible for women to have the vote? In fact, in 1918, when they gave it to women who had a certain amount of property, not to all women. In any case, you know, the first solution was to give it to women with property, which is not very surprising because in Benjamin Constant, he says that men who have political rights, men should have political rights only if they have sufficient property so as to not to be forced to work. Yeah.
Okay, it's 11:57. You can take it outside and talk it like gentlemen. I am putting the pacifier. We have another lecture coming in a few minutes. Thank you and happy 8th of March in a pretty appropriate intellectual way.
Yeah, thank you.